Hey guys, what's going on? Me Jay. Yeah, here to talk a little bit about finally the part three. Finally, uh, part three to the Vince McMahon documentary or docu series, uh, Mr. McMahon on Netflix. Yeah, part three is familiar to many of you guys. Um, like a lot of these stories, it, it's stuff we've been hearing for the last 20 plus years. But I'll go into it anyway. It starts off with a story that many people don't know about, and that is the first time that it's entitled Screwjob. So obviously, we know with the title Screwjob, we know exactly. Longtime wrestling fans will know exactly what this is getting into. We have videos on this channel talking about um, this screw job referenced in the video, but there's another screw job. There's an original screw job that occurred in 1985 that Vince McMahon goes into, and that is the screw job involving Wendy Richter and the Fabulous Moolah. He talks about Wendy Richter. He doesn't really go into a lot of detail about how important Wendy Richter was to the first WrestleMania and the angle involving Cyndi Lauper, but I went into it in the last video and they went into it in the last chapter. But basically, to give you guys some explanation of how big she actually was, she was the female Hulk Hogan. She was the headliner for the brawl to end it all in 1984. Like I talked about it before, Dave Wolf, Cyndi Lauper's manager, sits next to Captain Lou Albano on a plane. And he's telling like how he grew up in New York, so he was a huge wrestling fan, a fan of Vince Senior's territory. So he's talking to Captain Lou, and he at this time he's managing and going out with Cyndi Lauper. Cyndi Lauper has yet to release the song "Girls Just Want to Have Fun." So he comes up with the idea of having Captain Lou Albano in Cyndi Lauper's video as Cyndi Lauper's father in the song. So with this publicity, Vince McMahon sees this, and just like with Hulk Hogan in the Rocky 3 movie in 1982, in 1984, where Girls Just Want to Have Fun, he promotes it on his show. And he has Cyndi Lauper come out, and she's with Wendy Richter. And Captain Lou come out, and Captain Lou sang a whole bunch of sexist stuff. He's saying that the single blows up. Girls Just Want to Have Fun is one of the most popular songs of all time. So Captain Lou Albano is going on late night television shows like David Letterman. David Letterman always seems to be getting caught in these wrestler beefs. Remember, in '82 he got caught in the beef between Andy Kaufman and Jerry the King Lawler, right? So again, he's getting caught. He's going on David Letterman. Captain Lou is, and Captain Lou is disgusting. A fat guy with a Hawaiian shirt, a shirt all open on national TV. He's going out rubber bands in his beard and everything. He's going out there and he's like, "I'm the one responsible for Cyndi Lauper's success. It's because of me. It's because of me that Cyndi Lauper became the sensation that she became." Cyndi Lauper was huge, you know what I mean? But I don't think it was because of Captain Lou Albano. I just think it was because, of her unique talent. I mean, as the album said, she was so unusual. So anyway, he starts saying a whole bunch of sexist stuff. So like I said before, in the 1989 year in review video, when Lisa wanted me to talk about women in wrestling, Cyndi Lauper comes out and says to Captain Lou, you bring a wrestler and I'll bring a wrestler, and we'll have a match on MTV. This is when MTV and WWE started to do collaborations, you know. So Cyndi Lauper chooses Wendy Richter, and Captain Lou Albano chooses the fabulous Moolah, who trained Wendy Richter and who was the champion, the women's champion since the 1950s. Anyway, Captain Lou Albano ends up, I mean, Wendy Richter ends up defeating uh, the Fabulous Moolah for the championship, and and goes on to defend the title at WrestleMania 1 against Leilani Kai. So when and because of this, later on, Cyndi Lauper is presented with a gold record by Captain Lou Albano, in which Roddy Piper smashes the record over Captain Lou's face, turning over Captain Lou's head, turning Captain Lou into a babyface, prompting Mr. T to jump over the rail, and Mr. T and that to set up the main event for the first WrestleMania. And of course, intermediate into that is the Roddy Piper and Hulk Hogan feud. But my point is, this whole thing kicks off with Cyndi Lauper and Wendy Richter. Wendy Richter feels like she's owed the same amount of money as Hulk Hogan, because if the angle involving herself and Cyndi Lauper had not come to fruition, perhaps WrestleMania and Hulkamania and Hulk Hogan's popularity might not have been a thing. Yes, he had the cachet from Rocky 3, but keep in mind, it was already like 2 years past that time. You know what I mean? So he did, and because they they involved Cyndi Lauper, they then got other celebrities. Joe Piscopo from Saturday Night, was on Saturday Night Live at that time. Andy Warhol, the artist, and of course Mr. T, who was the biggest television star in the world at that time with the A Team. So, but it all started from Wendy Richter. So Wendy Richter felt like she was owed that. So here she is, 1985, a year later. She is the WWF Women's Champion, and she wants more money. And she's telling Vince, listen, I'm not going to drop the belt to anybody else unless you give me the amount of money that I feel like I'm owed. Vince says, we can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. He says in the documentary, he says, it's my title and I'll take it back if I want to. And he felt no qualms about what he did to Wendy. And what he did was, there was a wrestler named Spider Lady. She was portrayed by Judy Martin, right? But what Vince did was he put Moolah in the Spider Lady costume, because she was a mask wrestler. He puts her in the Spider Lady costume, and then he tells Moolah to small package her Wendy. And even though Wendy kicks out, the ref counts to 3 anyway. Now the ref was a state sanctioned ref. He wasn't employed by the WWF, but still he followed Vince's instructions. And on commentary, Jesse the Body Ventura and Gorilla Monsoon have no idea what to make of this. This is totally unprecedented. And you could see on Wendy Richter's face that she is flabbergasted. Now, this wasn't unprecedented in wrestling history. It happened plenty of times before, especially a famous example was Wayne Munn and Stanislav Zbyszko in 1925. The Goldust Trio, which was Toots Monk, the co-founder of the WWE, and Billy Sandow and the wrestler Ed Strangler Lewis, basically formed the rubric for what was to become the first wrestling promotion ever in history. So, like, they basically invented the concept of modern, modern wrestling. But anyway, they wanted Wayne Munn, this guy Wayne Munn, to go over Stanislav Zabisco. And Stanislav Zabisco, this was his real name. You know what I mean? It wasn't like Larry Zabisco. That's just his stage. That's just his stage name, right? Stanislav Zabisco. This was his real name. He was, I believe, of Polish descent. I'm not sure, but some kind of Eastern European descent, whatever. But it doesn't matter. But like the Goldust Trio wanted Wayne Munn to win, and they had to figure out a way to rig the shit and get Sabisco to lose, and that's exactly what they did. That was probably the first screw job in all of wrestling history in the 20s. But this 1985 was the first screw job in the WWF's history. Vince basically tricked Wendy Richter, and Wendy Richter says in the documentary, she says there's a saying in wrestling, nothing's personal, it's just business, and Vince reiterates this saying. Now, keep in mind, Wendy Richter was trained by the Fabulous Moolah. She knew that the Fabulous Moolah, that this wasn't Judy Martin, that this was the Fabulous Moolah. And she was like 2 times the age of Moolah at the time. Moolah was like in her 50s. She was super old, right? This wasn't like the time when she was Buddy Rogers' valet, or she was with Jungle Boy. I mean, I'm not Jungle Boy. Jungle Boy. Where she was young and attractive and vivacious in the 50s. No, this was the 1980s, and she was old. So Wendy Richter could have easily beaten the shit out of her if she had the chance. So anyway, from there in the documentary, they go back into the court case, and they talk about Hulk Hogan. The federal government had told Hulk Hogan that if he doesn't testify against Vince, that he would get like multiple years in prison. So like 16 years, he says. But with Hogan, you have to take everything with a grain of salt because you never know what's true and what's a lie, because he's a notorious liar. He's as notorious with his lies as Mr. Fuji, Kurt Anning, and Owen Hart were with their ribs, right? But and then he says, "Oh, they gave me immunity." You know what I mean? So even if I testified against Vince, whatever charges were against me, they couldn't, they couldn't put on me. So what he does a con job, because he doesn't give Vince up. He basically goes on the stand and says that Vince didn't distribute steroids to his wrestlers. Now, later on in 2003, when Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon would wrestle at WrestleMania 19, they would use this real life event and make it out to seem that Hulk Hogan testified in court against Vince McMahon and tried to get Vince locked up. That wasn't the case at all. He testified, he took the witness stand, yes, but he testified in favor of Vince. And that was part of the reason why Vince got off, because there was just no evidence that Vince had any knowledge of Dr. George Sahorian distributing the steroids. So He's off. He's in a neck brace. It was 1994. I remember it. OJ trial was just starting at that time too. Two high-profile sports-related celebrities on trial, one for murder and one for drug distribution. But Vince gets off. Now, many people say that the plan was at that time, Jerry Jarrett was working in the WWF. The plan was for Jerry Jarrett to take over booking duties for Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson, who at that time had been let go and wouldn't come back to the company until like 1996, right at the end of WrestleMania 12, because of the scandal. But Bruce Pritchard says, and he's right, that this scandal, these series of scandals, the Ring Boy scandal, the Rita Chatterton scandal, and the steroid distribution scandal, hurt the WWE severely. The role that they were on in the late 80s had completely stopped. It started by taking the belt off Hogan and putting it on Warrior. It continued by doing the Sergeant Slaughter Iraqi storyline in 1991. Then these other allegations came out in 1992. Then in 1993, Hulk Hogan leaves. Well, he left in 92 because the pressure was on him, so they concocted a whole storyline basically where he semi-retires, and the match with Sid at WrestleMania 8 was going to be his last match. Him and Vince McMahon have a sit down, and Vince says, thank you for the memories. Thank you for Hulkamania, right? But he just lays low. Like, he misses SummerSlam. He misses Survivor Series that year. He misses the Royal Rumble in 93, and then he comes back. The angle that they have him come back, Money Incorporated, IRS and Ted DiBiase on an episode of Raw, beat up Brutus the Barber Beefcake, hitting him with a briefcase, and we all know about it. Some fans knew through the WWF magazine about his parasailing accident, and he had to have his face reconstructed. So they made it like Beefcake was injured, right? And he puts on the mask, and him and Hogan comes back, as his tag team partner at WrestleMania 9. But with Jimmy Hart as their manager, this is Jimmy Hart has turned face now. But they don't really talk about that. They make it seem like Hulk Hogan left because of the steroid scandal and went to WCW. But the point is that he did eventually leave after King of the Ring 1993 and lost the title to Yokozuna. And he eventually left to go to Ted Turner. Macho Man on the outs with the company. They want to make him just an announcer. He had a sword feud with Crush, culminating in their match at WrestleMania 10. Falls Count Anywhere. He wants to work with Shawn Michaels, but Vince doesn't see it. He sees a lot of these guys associated with the steroided era of the company, so he forces them out, and they get signed by WCW because WCW now sees that Vince is down because of the steroid trial, because of all the scandals, and they pick up. Eric Bischoff is in charge of WCW since late 1993. He starts to get Ted Turner to open up his wallet and to get a lot of these bigger names from the 1980s WWF, and basically, give Vince McMahon a run for his money. So 1994, Vince talks about how in the documentary, he said Bret Hart, he gives the reason why Bret Hart was chosen. Number one, Bret Hart comes from a wrestling family. Number two, Bret Hart is comparatively smaller than the Ultimate Warrior or Hulk Hogan or the Macho Man. Number three, and Bret Hart says this, and Bret Hart has a choice way of saying it, because they talk about Lex Luger. Now Lex Luger came over to the WW. Well, they don't talk about the WBF, but basically, what the WBF was Vince McMahon's attempt at being a professional bodybuilding promoter, and he had to have somebody to be the face of it. And the guy he chose was Lex Luger. Lex Luger had recently left WCW. He was the champion. He dropped the belt to Sting at Super Bowl II. And made his way to the WWF. He debuted in WWF at WrestleMania 8. It was a segment after the Intercontinental title match, and he was basically a WBF star because there was a non-compete clause in his contract in WCW. So they couldn't acquire him directly and bring him into the WWF. They had to bring him into the WBF and make him the face of the WBF first. Now, the WBF never took off. It sucked. They had like one pay-per-view and it was horrible, right? They don't talk in this documentary about any of Vince McMahon's business blunders. And believe me, he had many. 2 times with the XFL in 2001 and 2020, both went under. The restaurant, WWF New York, the casino, WWE films only had like one good movie or two. Well, if you count that See No Evil movie with Kane, I guess that could be considered a good movie. But the only one I liked was Miss Call, starring Halle Berry. And there was another one starring Trey Songz. Uh, I forget what that's called. Trey Songz and Fetty Wap was in it. Blood Brother. Yeah, that was Blood Brother, produced by the WWE Studios. That was pretty good. Our Truth, like WWE Studios was a vehicle for wrestlers to get into movies. They talk in the on the other parts about No Holds Barred when Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan wrote that in 1989. We talked about it on the channel a lot. How it was a complete blunder, but they continued on making movies. The Marine, the first one in 2005, which basically became a vehicle for Cena. But that movie, Blood Brothers, that was supposed to be a vehicle for our Truth, right? Because it's a movie set in the hood, starring Trey Songz and Fetty Wap. But anyway, um, Vince McMahon has had many business blunders, and the WBF was one of those business blunders. So was Ico Pro, a dietarily supplement thing that they were pushing a lot in 1993. So with that going under, they decided to move Lex Luger to the center and bring him in as a wrestler. Initially, we talked about it Royal Rumble 1993. They bring him in as as Narcissus. It was originally Narcissus, like the Roman god, right? Or the Greco-Roman god, not the Narcissus, like somebody's narcissistic. It was Narcissus originally, but since nobody could pronounce it, they just changed it to the narcissist, Lex Luger. Because I remember when Bobby Heenan, because the whole storyline revolved. I remember we talked about it. Um, Survivor Series in 1992, the Ultimate Warriors out due to being busted for steroids, which they don't talk about, right? And he's supposed to team with the Macho Man to take on Ric Flair and Razor Ramon. But since he's out, Randy Savage is without a partner, so they're doing the primetime wrestling. This is the era when they did the primetime wrestling like it was the McLaughlin group. You had Hillbilly Jim there, you had Gorilla Monsoon, you had Bobby Heenan, all these wrestlers like in a roundtable discussion thing. And Randy Savage asked Mr. Perfect, will he be his partner at Survivor Series? And Bobby Heenan laughs and he says that Perfect walks behind Flair and then Perfect turns face and turns on Heenan. So Lex Luger, long story short, was brought in as okay. Kurt Hennig is Mr. Perfect, but this guy is better than perfect. This narcissist Lex Luger, he's better than perfect. So him and Mr. Perfect have their match at WrestleMania 9, which is a complete bust, right? Even Kurt Hennig, as good as he was, couldn't even save Lex Luger, right? So he's a heel, right? Up until July of 1993, they have this idea where all these athletes, football players, fellow WWF superstars, and even normal people will try to body slam Yokozuna, right? Because Hacksaw Jim Duggan knocked him off his back on that episode of Superstars, and Hogan beat him, but at WrestleMania 9. But the way that Hogan did it was Fuji threw salt in the eye, so that was kind of like cheating, right? So nobody has body slammed him yet. So everybody's coming out, all these NFL guys, um, all these wrestlers coming out. It's July. It's the 4th of July on the USS Intrepid. And finally, a helicopter comes down, and it's Lex Luger, and he's dressed in all red, white, and blue jeans. And Bobby Heenan approaches him in the aisle. He pushes Heenan, and he does it. He body slams Yokozuna, so they have him go around the country the whole summer and have these other superstars wearing red, white, and blue wristbands campaigning for him to, be the number one contender at SummerSlam at the Palace of Auburn Hills in Detroit, Michigan. Right, so it was reminiscent of Bill Clinton's campaign in 1992. Basically, it was supposed to mimic that, but he was a plate full of piss because he didn't win the title. He won the match on a count out. Yokozuna got counted out. So. And Vince's whole thing was like, okay, we'll put the belt on him at WrestleMania 10 in 94 at the Garden. Well, by the time that rolls around, the fans are more into Bret Hart. So they do the whole thing. Remember, we talked about in the 1994 year in review video of co-winners. Bret Hart and Lex Luger, and Luger took on Yoko first, and then Bret Hart took on him second, in which Bret Hart beat him to win the WWF Championship for the second time. So that's basically what Bret Hart's, Bruce Pritchard comes on and he says Luger was fine, but he was no Hulk Hogan. See, they wanted him to fill Hogan's shoes because even during that July 4th thing, when the helicopter came down, fans were still chanting Hogan, Hogan, because he hadn't gone to WCW yet. So his fate was still in limbo as it pertains to the WWF. So Bret Hart has an interesting line. He says, it was Bret Hart who picked the sword from the stone. In other words, he was the chosen one like King Arthur in the myths. He was the one that was going to carry the company. And that's what WrestleMania 10 symbolized. Macho Man came out there. Lex Luger came out there. They hoisted Bret Hart up on their shoulders. It was a magical night. I was there. I was 9 years old. And they mentioned why they chose Bret. Because Bret was clean. Brett was not going to be caught with underage girls in hotel rooms. He was not going to be caught with bags of cocaine. They mentioned Shawn Michaels, and that's when they started to talk about the new generation. The other superstars that were coming in. Razor Ramon was already there. He left WCW. He was the Diamond Stud in late 1991. Kevin Nash left in the early part of 1992 and made his way to the WWF as Diesel, Shawn Michaels' bodyguard, helping Shawn Michaels capture the Intercontinental Championship for the second time against Marty Jannetty, because after the feud with Lex Luger, Mr. Perfect goes on to feud with Shawn Michaels, because at WrestleMania 9, uh, Lex Luger during the time he was in the WBF. He was in a motorcycle accident and he had to have steel plates put in his arm. So he especially when he was a narcissist, he wasn't using the torture rack. He was using this move, knocking people out with the forearm. So he does that to Mr. Perfect at WrestleMania 9, and then Perfect gets counted out, and then he goes to the back looking for Luger, and Luger is talking to Shawn Michaels, and he happens to beat up Luger, and Shawn Michaels jumps in, and then now the feud is between Mr. Perfect and Shawn Michaels. They have one of the earliest confrontations on Raw in the summer of 1993 where they're fighting outside the Manhattan Center. It was cool. But Mr. Perfect cost Shawn Michaels the Intercontinental Championship when his tag team partner, Marty Jannetty, after being fired, because remember, they had a horrible match at the Royal Rumble 1993. We talked about it. One of them was intoxicated, either Michaels or Jannetty, whichever one. But Jannetty was let go. Some people say it wasn't because of the intoxication. Some people say he had a backstage fight with Ray Stevens, who was an agent at the time. I don't know, which version is true. I just know that Jannetty wouldn't be long for the WWF because he'd be out of there by the end of '93. But the point is, because Perfect interfered, Shawn Michaels felt, in a kayfabe sense, he needed protection, so he hires the former Vinny Vegas. In real life, how he came across Kevin Nash was by watching WCW TV, and he saw the Vinny Vegas character. Now, the character that Kevin Nash he was three characters in WCW. He was Oz. He was Master Blaster Steel. He came in as a tag team, Master Blaster Steel, and then later he was Vinny Vegas as part of the Diamond Exchange with DDP. Now, this plays an important role because later on, when they jumped back to WCW in 1996 and formed the NWO, and they talk about this in the documentary, they're sued for copyright infringement, even though the Diamond Stud and Vinny Vegas both are very close to Diesel and Razor Ramon. Anyway, they talk about this new WWF generation. And in June of 1994, Vince launches this initiative. Like I said, it's very funny because all throughout the King of the Ring pay-per-view that year, he's talking about the new generation. The other guys are over the hill because Hogan, the following month in July, is about to make his WCW debut in a match against Ric Flair. So he's trying everything he can to disparage Hulk Hogan, to get the fans to not watch what Hogan's doing in WCW with him and Flair. But the main event for that King of the Ring